So we have Yael Weisz Zilberman. She's the head of partnerships, the partnership manager in Startup Nation and partnerships of Finder. And we're going to learn what's Finder, what does it mean, what does she do in her job, and we're going to talk about building global networks in Finder, which is super interesting and something that I'm very intrigued about because I was part of the Israeli part, and now I'm going to learn more about what they're doing overseas. So what's going to happen here technically is I'm going to I'm going to be the screen sharer, and again, like last speakers, I'll just disappear and let Yael lead and just be behind the scenes so she can talk about the slides. And if you have questions, we have the Q&A here. You see we have the left feed. The left feed is the feed for the session. The middle feed is the one for general feed for all the event, for all the conference that you can see. Michael will probably post stuff there, and other people post there all the time to help orientation and just connect. And you have on the right the attendees that you can send direct messages. But in the feed of the session, you can have feed, Q&A, raise your hand. If you have a question and you're upvoted to one of the first people that have great questions, I'll ask you to raise your hand and I'll just call you on stage to ask Yael questions, but it's going to happen only after 30 minutes of presentation. So without any further ado, I'm going to start sharing my screen, and so we can finish the technical part. Great.
Mike.
Yeah.
So
great. So I'm going to put it full screen in a second. Yael, how are you doing?
I'm very excited of being here. I think that so many people in this crowd are familiar with the Startup Nation Finder. Use it, love it, hate it, but few of the people in the crowd are perhaps familiar with the special initiative that we've launched a couple of years ago. That's the Global Finder Network. That's another side of the story that we're building at Startup Nation Central, connecting innovation hubs from around the world through this platform. And this is the story that I'm here to tell today.
Great. So let's go for it. I'm going to hide myself and you're going to lead.
Good. Thank you. Leaving, I guess. You can go into the next slide, please, Mike. Great. So I'm going to be saying next every slide, after every slide. But so just a few words about myself. Since this is a virtual event, you know, people usually leave those introductions for the end. But since we don't have any other opportunity just to meet and mingle, it's so difficult in this virtual reality. I find that it's more important just to say a few words about ourselves, introduce ourselves so people have context. And so, as well said by Mike, I'm the partnerships manager of the Global Finder Network at Startup Nation Central. What this means is that I work closely with our partner organizations around the world, organizations that choose to join the Global Finder Network, as part of the onboarding process of them to the network, as well as developing the partnership with them further in order to find additional business bridges between the markets. So I wear like two hats. On the one hand, I'm working with them as they launch their own Finder platform in their markets. And on the other hand, I am carefully learning their market needs in order to find business opportunities to connect between the Israeli market and their market, as well as between the network partners. So that's a bit about me, being with Startup Nation Central for about a year and a half, perhaps even more. So Mike, next slide, please. So many on this audience are very familiar with the Israeli innovation ecosystem, but for the context, and this is just important to understand where are we coming from, what led us to set up the Startup Nation Finder in the first place. You have to know two facts about the Israeli innovation ecosystem. One is that we're very innovative, as well explained by many innovation rankings, such as this one from Bloomberg. And the other factor is, and Mike, please, next slide, is that we are very entrepreneurial. So it's a combination between innovation and entrepreneurship that's really the force behind our ecosystem. We have one of the densest ecosystems in the world, and we are very, at Startup Nation Central in particular, we're very obsessed with the numbers. We know that there are 6,597 companies as of yesterday. Haven't checked today, maybe perhaps I should. Active startups and tech companies around here. We know the exact number of VC and investors that have both local and foreign that have a foot in Israel, the number of accelerators, incubators, the multinational corporations that have R&D centers here in Israel, the number of academic technologies that are being commercialized by our academic institutions, and the number of tech communities that are part of our system. 99 says in this slide, but actually just checked 5 minutes before this conversation and it jumped into 100. We've reached the 100 number. So we're very obsessed in Israel, in Startup Nation Central, about the numbers. And the reason is that, how do we know these exact numbers? How are we managing to monitor what's going on here in such a updated manner? And the answer to that is thanks to the Finder platform that we've developed. But what was the need we were addressing when we, no, that's okay, Ma, you can jump to the next slide. What was the need behind this obsession with the numbers that led us to develop Startup Nation Finder? And how did all this begin? So about 8-9 years ago, as Israel is an emerging tech ecosystem, we faced a number of challenges that to some degree we still face today. And many innovation ecosystems around the world, from what we know, are facing the same kind of challenges. We're talking about local connectivity. Perhaps it sounds it sounds like obvious here in Israel, where everybody knows everybody, but even in such a dense place like Israel, we've learned that it's important to prevent silos from appearing and getting entrepreneurs to know each other and to try and identify the right investors to reach out and the other way around. So increasing local connectivity is always a need. Even here, we've seen a jump in the local connectivity since we launched Finder, and thanks to that, partially thanks to that, of course. So that's one challenge. The other challenge is, of course, creating and maintaining, positioning the global presence of companies in the global stage, promoting the brand of a country such as Israel in technology. The third challenge is, okay, so you have data about what are the startups around, what are they doing, what are the technologies, the investors, what are the multinational corporations are looking for, but how do you turn those data points into insights for the purpose of policy making and promotion? When I'm saying policy making, it's at the level of the government, and of course, it's also at the level of nonprofits and other tech development, tech ecosystem development organizations such as Startup Nation Central. Where do you put your efforts? Just to give an idea of what data into insights means. So it's well known that Israel is very strong in cyber and fintech sectors. What is amazing for me to see is how the field of digital health is actually increasing and positioning itself almost at the same level. To be sure, it's less well known, but there are more Israeli companies in digital health than there are in cyber, and that has its influence on how you build your policy and your intervention strategies. Now, the fourth challenge that we're talking about is creating a tool that can help in fostering new business opportunities for entrepreneurs, for investors, for corporations. I think that now in a COVID reality where all our lives have turned virtual and networking has become virtual, it's even clearer the need for providing a platform, a field where these players can come together and actually connect. It's not just about being able to find each other, but actually to connect with each other and explore business opportunities. So coming from these 4 challenges that we faced and still face to a certain degree, we realized that these challenges are common in all markets. And particularly when you're talking about tier 2, tier 3, tier 4 innovation hubs around the world, countries that are not yet the Silicon Valley or the Big Apple, these challenges have a lot of significance when you're coming from a position that you want to build and increase the impact of your ecosystem around the world. So next slide, please, Mike. And the next one, as I was saying, it's common to Israel. It's something that we face here, and it's being faced in other places around the world. So we started by searching the existing digital platforms out there and realized that in a way, partial solutions are being offered. So one of the problems is that, particularly when you're talking about emerging innovation ecosystems, not the Silicon Valley, there is a limit to the accuracy and transparency that this databases, such as the ones that are written here, Crunchbase, PitchBook, Dealroom, can provide. Because of their membership model, the data is not transparent, it's costly, and it's usually not comprehensive, does not necessarily include young, very early stage initiatives that have not yet been backed by venture capital investments. That's on the one hand when it comes to the quality of the data. And of course, that they don't provide local ownership of data to a local organization, such as in our case, Startup Nation Central. The data is owned by these platforms abroad. On the connectivity side, we realized that these platforms, though searchable, they do not allow for meaningful connection and engagement opportunities. It's difficult to leverage the data that's there in order to proactively create those opportunities for the companies. And so, Mike, please, next slide. And so that's how we started building what has become Startup Nation Finder. It's our innovation discovery platform for the Israeli ecosystem. It does 3 things. Basically, it allows you to find companies, connect with them, and grow opportunities. So it comprehensively maps more than 6,500 companies in Israel, plus the investors, accelerators, incubators, MNCs, as I mentioned, kind of creating a gateway into what Israel has to offer in terms of innovation. But when it comes to the connectivity, it allows the ecosystem to become transparent and searchable, and enables direct and meaningful connection between the local stakeholders and the local stakeholders with international stakeholders. Makes it faster and easier for anybody from anywhere around the world to find and connect with the right people and capital that they need in order to innovate and grow locally and internationally. And when it comes to the grow factor, it really allows to convert data into valuable insights that can have an influence on policy and the mapping of trends. So moving forward from that, Mike, please, next slide. Today, Startup Nation Finder has more than 70,000 visits a month, and 60% of them are coming from abroad, representing collaboration, investment, and business opportunities. It has become, in a way, part of the basic infrastructure of the Israeli ecosystem for developing it further. And it has value for different key players such as startups, investors, and multinationals. But in addition to that, and an additional layer to all of this is that it positions Startup Nation Central as the go-to source for Israel's innovation and proactively creating business opportunities for the stakeholders. Next, please. Next, Mike, please. Thank you. So today, recognizing the many advantages that that platform has brought to Israel as an infrastructure, Startup Nation Central started to offer the model to other countries and states and emerging innovation hubs around the world as part of an initiative that we call the Global Finder Network, where we're partnering with organizations around the world that get a separate instance, a separate finder to map and develop their local ecosystem, but using a unified technology and platform and methodologies that were developed by us and have proven value to the success story of Israeli innovation. And in addition to that, these partner organizations become members of a growing network, global network of countries and states that share best practices and build collaboration opportunities between the markets. As I said today, in a virtual reality of the Corona era, this has reiterated, strengthened the need for an effective global digital tool that allows to find solutions, innovation, and create collaborations between markets. And we see a rise in interest about this initiative. Next, please. And this is the Global Finder Network as we speak. To date, Startup Nation Central has helped establish Finder platforms in countries in Asia, in Thailand, in New Zealand. Taiwan is coming next, as well as in a couple of states in the US, in Michigan and Texas. In each of these locations, we choose a leading local partner, an organization that may be a nonprofit, a public entity, such as in New Zealand, we're working with the local innovation authority of New Zealand. In other countries, we're working with nonprofits, and in other instances, we're working even with for-profit organizations that manage to leverage the data that's transparent and accessible for additional services that they provide. And this network is expected to grow swiftly throughout the rest of the next year, 2021. We're most probably expanding into Latin America and Africa first. Next, please. But I want to touch, now that I've explained about the vision of the initiative that we're building, this network of networks that we're building. I want to emphasize a special chapter in this story, which is the chapter of communities, because we are in a conference that really puts the role of communities as the multipliers, force multipliers of an ecosystem. And I think that among this crowd, there is no need to explain further what an incredible asset these tech communities can bring to play in building an ecosystem. But to be honest, we only started to including tech communities in our Finder mapping and as well as in the global mappings in February this year. And the question is, what has brought us to touch upon this specific area, and how do we map them? How have we managed to map them? Because, as you know, communities is a very elusive term. So we see the communities as the connectors between within the ecosystem. They have a very, very special role that they play. They help, from the Israeli experience, they help global players to engage with the local market through the structures that they've created. And in a way, their presence in Finder is providing these communities with much needed global visibility that was lacking before. We realized that by including the communities in the mapping, we're in a way helping to create as well a benchmark strategy, a global standard for community leaders. And when I'm talking about communities, I mean entities, not legal entities necessarily, but those groups that have a common ground, a common place, and a facilitator for sure. In each market, it looks really different from what we learned working with our Global Finder partners, which is also a very interesting chapter that I'm not going to elaborate much on this conversation, but now that we are mapping communities in Israel and we are encouraging our partners abroad to map the communities in their markets, we see the differences about how communities are structured and function in each place, and it's really incredible to see how in some places communities may be backed by government funding, and in others is a completely non-for-profit initiative of a group of people. And so, moving forward, to the next slide, please. So today we, as I was saying, we include this unique chapter as part of our mapping of hubs. As you can see in this slide, I'm showing here the partial profile of one of the well-known communities in Israel, Ecomotion, that focuses on smart mobility. And we include in these profiles information about what are the common grounds of these communities, what are the topics that all the members of the community have in common, and who is a facilitator, and what is the kind of gathering place, the common place where activities take place, whether it's online or offline, and additional information that helps these communities position themselves as a unique link between the startups and the entrepreneurs on the one hand, and the investors and multinational corporations on the other hand. Next, please. So now we have reached, actually, it says here 99 communities, but we are actually reached the mark of 100 communities. And I think that's on itself a reason to celebrate on this unique conference that touches upon the role of communities. We have 100 tech communities in Israel mapped on Finder, and that's quite unique. Thank you. Mike, next, please. So moving forward and kind of to sum up this conversation, I want to kind of connect everything that I've been talking about to the role that, the way that Startup Nation utilizes the data that we've created, because we're a data-driven organization based on the mapping that we do for Israel. But in a sense, we leverage that data in order to create insights about our market, with the objective of strengthening Israel's innovation ecosystem, of course, but with the special touch, the special focus of connecting that ecosystem to the world. And the partner organizations that we're working abroad as part of the Global Finder Network, they find other ways and other focuses of leveraging their data for building and strengthening their own innovation ecosystems. And it's also unique to see how in each market we learn from our partners about their needs and what stage they find themselves in the innovation roadmap, let's call it that way, and how they utilize and leverage the data that they're creating about their markets for different purposes. Next, please. And so I think that just to leave you a thought about a call to action, there are different people in this audience, I know, Some of you are community managers that come from the nonprofit kind of tech ecosystem development organizations. Others are coming more from the corporate and startup world. And what the one thought that I want to plant on your mind as a summary of this introduction to Global Finder is that as we are growing this platform, we are looking to connect with ecosystem development organizations from around the world that are interested in being part of a global network, that are sharing best practices and can kind of have this same obsession with data that we have at Startup Nation Central. And I'd be happy to be in touch with any of you that can help us navigate that and connect us to interesting organizations that we can explore partnership opportunities with them. Thank you.
Thank you, Yael. That was great. You know, it's amazing. I've been working with SNC, I think since the beginning of 2018, when somehow I think I met Michal even before the Community Forward retreat, and then the deal was even closing there about having SNC as a partner in our first ISCL summit, and since then we created the community index, the tech community index with you guys, which is now a product on Finder. But actually all the global finders is something that I just heard about when we started this event, and I heard about you working with New Zealand and Thailand. Who would believe Thailand as tech ecosystem? Even though after I was in Bangkok a few times, I was like, wow, at least Bangkok, not the rest of Thailand, feels like a crazy high-tech hub.
It is.
It is. People don't know it, but like you think about Thailand, you think of just about beaches and, you know, and vacations and stuff like that. But things are happening around the world. New Zealand, it's not just Kiwis and Michal Sero, but you know, there's so many things happening in these small upcoming hubs. And where can we find the finders? How are they branded? How would we find those indexes if we would want to?
So first of all, there's the URL of the globalfinder.org. That's kind of a landing page about the whole initiative that explains what I've been explaining in this presentation. But there you have the links to the different finders, and you can check them out. The one that's coming up in the next probably December or January is Taiwan. That's going to be launching, and that's super interesting. Again, Taiwan is an enormous market, a very, very interesting one, very different and complementary one with the Israeli ecosystem. And we're kind of interested in working with these kind of markets where we see the complementarities, the potential complementarities, and we see the connections and the value that they can create between our startups and theirs. And those are the kind of additional, and so there's like kind of an additional layer to this conversation. On the one hand, the partner organizations are mapping their innovation ecosystems using a proven tool that we've developed here in Israel. But on the other hand, we're exploring, we're creating kind of an infrastructure for joint projects that go beyond, touch upon data, but go beyond that.
That's unbelievable. And do you remember how many communities are there do everybody use all the parts of Finder? Because I know that you do customizing to every ecosystem.
Yeah, it's true. We do customize. But in Israel, we've mapped so far, we've put a special effort on this, thanks to the partnership with you, as I know. And so we've reached the 100 number, the how to say, agora.
Yeah, the 100.
Yeah.
100
yeah, it's a milestone, I would say, something to celebrate. In the other markets, we're talking about smaller numbers, but that's to be expected because we're working with emerging innovation hubs. And in that sense, They are at a different stage, but that's exactly what we're interested in these opportunities to share knowledge and best practices and see how things look differently in each place. We're learning a lot from this experience, and so are our partners.
Okay, I was actually going to add Michal to the talk, but she took off her hand, so I need her to raise her hand again. Great. Great. I'm going to hide myself because I don't want to take focus off Michal.
That's okay. It's not. It's a joint effort. Yeah, thank you very much for that. That was super interesting. And it would be great if you could elaborate just a little bit more about the aspect of creating the network of networks, because I think that is super interesting, because one of the key things that Finder is doing, they're doing the mapping, but then they're taking each one of these ecosystems and then connecting them together. Can you talk a little bit about that, about those impacts that we're starting to see from connecting two worlds, two tech worlds together? I think it's a really interesting process that's happening.
Yeah, I think that we are. So there are two layers to that question that you're asking. On the one hand, we are creating a unified language, and this is something that cannot be taken for granted. We are using, one of the key aspects of this network is our partners are using a unified platform and a unified methodologies and definitions for mapping their ecosystem. So where we're comparing and we're looking at startups in Taiwan and startups in Israel, then these are really comparable. These are apples to apples. I've heard funny stories about, there are lots of mappings of companies, of startups around the world. This is not the only tool available, but I've heard funny stories about people saying, oh, we have 30,000 startups in our country. 6,000 of them are tech startups. So what are the others? Okay. Question goes unanswered. And in that sense, through creating this unified language and this raising the bar about what a startup is and how we look at it, we are really creating a language that's common around all the partners. And that by itself has value in facilitating the connections between the markets. But on the other hand, as they are building their networks, they're mapping their own ecosystems, we are really putting a lot of resources in identifying joint project opportunities and the complementarities between the different countries. And we know that our partners are in touch with each other, and we're also encouraging that. But when it comes to the Israeli experience that I lead, it's fascinating to see what's unique about each country, each market. You say New Zealand, so they are an innovation hub when it comes to agtech. So are we. How can we work together? What assets do we have that they lack, and vice versa? One of the areas of interest at the moment being, no doubt, the area of AI and AI enabling technologies in particular. Sounds like a promising ground for us. Talking about Texas and other in Texas it's different. So it's not agtech, but it's water there. There are enormous opportunities in connecting the water needs of Texas with the water expertise that we have in Israel. And in every place, it's just different. And that's kind of the conversation that we are actively having with our partners, on top of, in parallel with assisting them when it comes to setting up their Finder, understanding the methodologies, having a quality data for their own sake.
And I think on the community front, the interesting thing is when we take the Kiwi ag tech community and we take the Israeli ag tech community, and you suddenly take these two networks and you bring them together, I think then we start seeing really interesting cross-feeding between two ecosystems, two tech ecosystems, and a whole conversation going on that starts really from the grassroots. And I think that's one of the amazing things that we get to see through our work.
So how cool it is that when you need somebody in New Zealand to talk to about AgTech, you just go into this finder that in their case it's called Scale Up New Zealand, and you just search for what you need and you can connect with that person. You can identify who's the key team members of that entity. And it's just a few clicks away. You don't get lost in the world of information that you find on Google that doesn't necessarily lead you to identify the key team members. Being an information specialist is a profession. That's something that I've learned. It's just so useful that we know that we have a team of people that are doing that hard work to allow all the rest of them to reach out so quickly and fast to the right people that you need to connect with.
I want to add, when I was studying my MBA in information systems and specializing there, they were talking about the paradox was about also innovation. I forgot about it. The paradox of performance, or paradox of I lost the word for it. But the idea that when you think that if you have more technology and more information, you'll have more ways to solve things. But the only thing that happens, you have more tasks and more blurbs and more distraction, more things that you don't know are correct. And that's exactly why you need communities. Because if you have on Finder, the Israeli one at least, 6,000 startups, and you want to know which company to go to, where do you start? Which company do you approach? And if you go through a community, through a networking assets, you already have a filter. You already have a networking master, a super connector to talk to, and there are those people that can really help you. And most of them do it out of passion. Most of them do it out of like a real inherent interest in that part of the ecosystem, in that community. And that's where they're so embedded. And even though Finder has amazing data specialists, the people that are most connected are usually the community specialists that work and they help inform each other. So it's a triangle that the guys, like the guys or girls, the Sheilas and blokes of Finder, like Vered, that's information specialist, helps us, take out and give the information in an accurate way. But to get the right data to start with, we need those community leaders, those super connectors that they're moving the networking assets of the platform. And so, by the way, out of all the platforms, how many of them have communities? I don't know if maybe I missed the answer about it. How many have the communities on the platform?
So New Zealand has them, Michigan has them, Texas is starting to build them. So Texas was only launched in August, and we're focusing on uploading the enormous amount of startups that are active in their market, startups and investors. It takes time. It takes time until
we
reach that point. But communities are, as you were mentioning, Mike, I think that they have an enormous advantage as connectors to many of the other stakeholders out there, because for somebody to directly engage with a startup entrepreneur, you have to have a very clear offer on the table. But if you work through a community, through a facilitator, you can get a glimpse about what's going on there, understand. You have time to learn, and you have the legitimacy to kind of engage, but without necessarily going right to signing the MOU a week afterwards. And so we are seeing, and particularly from the Israeli experience, we are bringing the communities to the front. And by the way, just reminds me that one of the interesting projects that we lately did with New Zealand, with the Innovation Authority of New Zealand, was connecting them with the Israeli machine learning community. And it was fascinating for them to see how it works here and what kind of projects they're doing here, and what kind of knowledge they bring to the table.
Yeah, they have a super amazing active community, especially on Meetup. And that's part of what we did in the platform. How do you map a community and show how do you get to all their activities and all their important activities, and the activities of the community as a window to finding those people and going and networking with them, sometimes even directly without connecting to the community manager. You can just go to a meetup, today virtual meetups, and just go and listen directly to the network, to the internal node, as Guy Levy called it in the morning. That's within the community. Yes, Michal.
And Mike, and that's another point, just speaking about mapping communities in other countries. It's that whole aspect of how do we map the communities correct, and that's part of that learning curve that every country needs to go through, and every one of these platforms we take them through as well. Is how do you map communities? It's such a hard question. You know, what is a community? And part of this work is actually not just deciding what it is, but actually going through this thinking process and knowing and making sure that it's relevant and true for their country as well. And that's the beauty of it, is really seeing if definitions and how we group communities and how we break it down, if it's true for every country and every place. And I think it's a really interesting process that we're going through.
Yeah,
Exactly.
it requires as well as flexibility.
Yeah.
Listen, it was such an informative session for me. I don't know, it was one of the sessions I was waiting for, because it's a lot about what we're doing. And there's so much happening in SNC that, you know, we need the session online with hundreds of people registered in order to get what's happening. So that was great. And now we have it recorded, and more people around the world will know about Global Finder, which is really important in helping ecosystem and about the amazing work you're doing globally. By the way, I asked Benji Singer a question, and I'm going to ask it to you. What's the vision of Global Finder for 1 year from now? And as they call it in LinkedIn, the fuzzy vision for 5 years from now for Global Finder.
Where we're certainly looking to expand the network, and we are actively expanding the network next year. And I don't remember if our target is for next year or the 5 years, but we want to get to a network that's robust enough to kind of provide more synergetic opportunities for the members. And I think that we, as I was saying, looking at diverse markets, the diversity is so important here. And we're looking at markets that are usually not really the priority sometimes of some other networks, such as Latin America and Africa. And those are the places where we see the most potential. And I think that that's where we're putting our efforts.
So you have to join the session with Anna Eclado tomorrow. The roundtable was Anna that leads the Afri Labs with 227 hubs around Africa, which is really crazy. When she was a speaker 2.5 years ago in the first ISL Summit, there were 81 hubs in 27 countries. So I don't know how many countries there are, but they almost tripled the amount of hubs they have in less than 3 years, which is incredible, almost exponential growth. And so that's amazing. Yael, thank you so much for your time. Michal, do you have any other questions you want to add?
No, I think we're pretty done and we're out of time. So,
yeah, so that's where we're finishing. So I would continue with Yael and you for much longer. So thanks to you, everyone, and see you in the next session. The next session is with Derek Anderson, our keynote. He's finishing now a talk with Israelis and the United Emirates, a startup grind, his own startup grind that he founded, invited him to have an international session that's actually continuing until an hour and half an hour from now, but he's leaving in the session in the middle of it to join us because he had he promised to join us. So don't miss the session with Derek. the guy who founded the community, was 3.5 million people, over 600 chapters, unbelievable stats, and also on the way, by the way, created a few startups, one of them now, Bevy, that raised almost $50 million and created this huge platform that he's going to tell us all about. So Yael, thank you again, Michal, for helping facilitate and partner and do everything behind the scenes. Michal, you need to meet Michal if you didn't meet her. Anyway, thank you guys and have a great time, and see you in the next session in 15 minutes. Bye.